All right, welcome to another episode of Express Outdoors State of Waterfowl series. I'm Doug Miller, your host down here at Gros Savon Lodge in South Louisiana. We got the usual crew again here tonight. We got Mr. Jim Ronquest over at the stud yard. What's going on, Jim? You doing all right tonight?
I'm doing well, Doug. Thanks for asking.
And then we got Cason Short with Bill Byers Hunter Club out of, actually, you're on your way back to Memphis tonight, I guess.
Yeah, they've got one of the bridges shut down, so my commute has been interesting today.
Nothing like being stuck on the highway, so we appreciate you taking the time to be with us. Jim, we especially thank you tonight. You got a lot going on. You kind of had to take a little break from, Callapalooza going on at R&T this week?
Yeah, we got Callapalooza going on at the shop. There's folks cooking, and there's all kinds of stuff going on here. It's Jay Stevens night, so I don't have pretty much done for the day other than another appointment I got to hit at 6:30. So, it's just you put one hat on for a little while, then wear another.
Good deal. We appreciate y'all being here. And we got a couple of cool guests tonight. Similar to what we did on our podcast last time, we kind of have deviated a little bit from the scientific world and started talking to a few of the guys that are just out there in the field and spend a lot of time in the outdoors and just listening to some of the observations that, if you recall, we had Lee Chose last go round, and he kind of gave us a perspective from Minnesota. And we got a couple of guys, Grant Hillman and Jake Lattendresse, that we're going to get to later. Before we jump over to that, I wanted to get with Cason and let you make a little announcement. I know here a while back on Instagram, we saw a picture of you and Jim actually at the legislature in Arkansas, and some really cool things happening in the world of waterfowl. And you guys are setting some of the precedent. Tell us a little bit about what happened in the legislature a couple months ago.
Jimbo and I got invited to the Capitol. Usually for someone like me, that's not something you say no to. So we jumped in the truck, went over there, and it was HR 1014. Isn't that right, Jimbo?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So they passed a bill there in the state of Arkansas. Basically, it's putting a precedence or a higher value on earmarking money for habitat restoration in the state of Arkansas. So definitely getting the ball rolling, putting the right foot forward. Go ahead, Jimbo.
Well, not to cut you off, but I printed it out just for this reason. It's pretty cool, and I'll let you pick up after this. But knowing you're sitting on the side of the road in the truck, it might be easier for me. So HCR 1014 is its whole premise is to emphasize the value of waterfowl and waterfowl habitat in Arkansas to the economy, recreation, heritage, and quality of life in the state, and to support efforts that boost this critical part of the state's economy. So as Cason said, it doesn't do a lot by itself, but it unlocked the gate for future financial effort. Go ahead,
Yeah, I
Cason.
think it's what, Ed Penny kind of told us was that, going forward, they'll be able to go back and kind of hold people's feet to the fire and say, hey, you remember when you signed this? This is what this is for. So it's the first step and maybe the most valuable as far as doing a lot of good habitat work in our state there.
And if any of y'all would like to have a copy of it, we've got copies of it we can send around. I'm happy to email it to you if you'd like to read it. It's they really get into some of the economic benefits here and some of our geospatial kind of stuff. How important some of the landscapes have our GTRs, bottomland hardwood stuff. They get pretty deep into, for example, Doug, I know you're on the Rice Foundation, but talk about we produce 50% of the rice grown in the U.S., contribute $6 billion to the state's economy, employs 25,000 people. Whereas outdoor recreation is a major economic driver in Arkansas. This thing goes on, it talks about how much rice we produce. We produce 50% of the rice in the country, which amounts to some $6 billion annually and 25,000 jobs. But for us, more so than that, is outdoor recreation is a major economic driver in Arkansas, generating an estimated $9.7 billion. That's $9 billion with a B. $700 million in consumer spending and supporting more than 96,000 jobs in the state, just outdoor recreation. Now, I don't know how far they base that down to just somebody working as a, guide hand for, day guide wages for 60 days a year. However, that still adds to that fellow's or lady's income. So it's pretty cool. And it goes on, talks about hunters support Arkansas's economy by contributing an estimated economic impact of over $70 million annually, or about $1 million a day in the state of Arkansas. That's just here. Let's add up what it does in Louisiana, Mississippi, Missouri, Oklahoma, Kansas, Nebraska. It's pretty big. And the fact that we've got it here on paper that it is important, and some of our political folks are realizing that when it comes time to get funding for things, it will make it easier for us, I think, to go after and get that funding. That's
some really good stuff. And I can somewhat be pleased to announce, I can't give you all the details, but there's something very similar going on in Louisiana. There was actually a resolution passed through one of the Natural Resource House of Representatives committee hearings today that moved up, that Louisiana is going to be right in behind you guys doing some of the same stuff. So really that's exciting times. I know we certainly can't take credit for all that's going on, but there definitely seems to be some kind of movement where people are aware of what's going on and trying to figure out what, all those questions we keep asking, where are the ducks? And so these are certainly some great starts, and to be able to get some type of legislature written to where we can work together with all the agencies and put priority on it is really exciting.
Agreed.
Cason, did you want to add anything to that before we leave that subject?
No, I think that pretty well sums it up. It's a good step for us, for Arkansas. Missouri has done a really good job in recent years with their habitat work. And we talk a lot about Louisiana, and that's, I think, the big thing plaguing Arkansas and Louisiana is habitat. So it's a good step, and it's nice to see that people are paying attention and taking notice of what's going on.
Well, hopefully in the next couple episodes, maybe we can elaborate some more on what the outcome of this is. It's certainly going to be a good thing. So on a different note, I did want to make this announcement. A lot of you guys in the waterfowl world may have saw this, and it's somewhat, I don't know if you want to call it disturbing or disheartening, but for the second straight year in a row, due to COVID, they have canceled the waterfowl breeding population habitat survey in Canada. And we wanted to just let the public know, if you didn't read that, there was several news releases. We didn't want to get in detail with that tonight because we think that's a whole nother episode, but it is kind of upsetting to know we're going into a drought on the prairie, and we've got a 2-year gap now in data, and yet we continue to go with our regular waterfowl season. So it's going to be interesting to see what comes, and we'll elaborate more on that subject maybe in the next podcast. So let's move on to our guest tonight. I think we got some really cool discussion coming up. I know we got 2 great guys, and let me go ahead and start by introducing them. Grant Hillman, if you don't know him, because he seems to know everybody, is got quite a reputation in the outdoor world as a whole, but especially in the duck world. And I've known him for quite a few years now. And, this guy, if there's anybody that's hunted the Flyway, he's been from south of the border to north of the border and everywhere in between. And the guy's seen a lot of marsh and a lot of water and a lot of ducks, and he really knows his stuff, and he's a really great guy and really energetic. And he actually was a guide at Gros Savon for a little while, and due to circumstances beyond our control with all the hurricanes and what all happened with Gros Savon this year being down in the rebuilding process, Grant can't be still, so he jumped in the truck and jumped over to Kansas and started up a guide service over there, and it already appears to be pretty successful. And after some conversations, we got to talking, and he had some really great insight on some of the things that were going in Kansas. So, Grant, real quick, why don't you just tell us about Magnum Outfitters and kind of what you do over there, and then we'll move over to introduce Jake after that.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, it was kind of one of those crossroads decisions after the hurricanes. The one hurricane was okay. We can come back from that, and then there was another one, and then there was another one, then there was another one, and it was like, all right, that's enough. I'm tired of fighting with insurance, rebuilding, and basically woke up the next morning and told my wife I was going to Kansas. And she was like, "Do what?" And I was like, "Yeah, I'm going to Kansas. Got a buddy up there who runs a deer and turkey outfit, and he's been chomping at me to get up there and start waterfowl hunting." So I said, "Well, I guess now's the time." And so I jumped in the truck and took off to Kansas. And heck, here we are. You know, that's kind of how I got to Kansas for waterfowl anyway this year.
It happened really fast, I know. And your outfit is called Magnum Outfitters. Is that correct?
That's correct. Magnum Outfitters.
And you finished one duck season. I think you guys even may have snuck around on a few turkeys here in the last month.
Yeah, we just wrapped up our turkey season. Actually, drove in from Kansas last night. We wrapped up my last crew this past weekend and kind of locked the doors and headed out. You know, we had a pretty good turkey season. It was weather was kind of hampering for a minute, but heck, I think everybody killed a bird, at least one bird, and we enjoyed a hell of a spring. That's for sure.
Well, good deal. Let me jump over to our next guest, get him introduced here so we can have some group discussion. And he's last but not the least. This guy is just a really good guy that's kind of behind the scenes more than up front. That you've probably seen a lot of his work, or if you most recently watch any of the Bassmaster Live tournaments, he's one of the cameramen out in the boat. And Jake Lattendresse, we're happy to have you with us tonight. And we've got you on board not only because of your good camera work and all your outdoor experience, but you're actually part owner now in Prairie Rock Outfitters in Nebraska. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so thank you. It's good to be here with all of you guys. Cason, I don't know you just yet personally as well, but I know you're hanging around with some good people, so we got to get together and at least have a beer or something. Talk ducks, but yeah,
I don't know. Good people's debatable.
Piss on you, Wyatt.
People I know anyway. So I'm part owner at Prairie Rock Outfitters, and we're located on the North Platte River in western Nebraska. We have we're actually a large operation in terms of land mass. We've got about 350,000 acres and 28 miles of very unique river bottom, including the infamous warm water sluice system along the North Platte River. And I've been at it now for this coming season will be my fourth season at Prairie Rock as shareholder there. And we have lots of ducks and lots of deer, lots of turkeys, and I'm looking forward to this conversation and integrating western Nebraska into, Arkansas and Kansas and Louisiana and Missouri and everything we're going to talk about tonight.
Well, good. We're glad to have both you guys here. And like we said earlier, as part of this podcast, we've had the opportunity to visit with a lot of people in the waterfowl world, and we seem to be having this common thing. There's everybody, whether it's in Louisiana or even with Lee Chose up in Minnesota, everybody's kind of scratching their heads. We're not really sure what's happening, but we do know that something is going on. And when we had that, Grant and I had some conversations since post-duck season in Kansas. And so we wanted to get you two guys, because even though you're not in the Mississippi Flyway, you've got some valuable information. And it's interesting for us to hear what's going on kind of west of us. And so we just wanted to get y'all's perspective on the last few hunting seasons, and in Grant's case, his last round here in Kansas. So Grant, I'm gonna just let you open the floor, Grant, and start telling us a little bit of some of the things you observed, and we'll just see where the conversation goes.
Man, Kansas was last year. It was it's obviously, if no one's hunted, the Midwest, or if you haven't hunted outside of, say, Missouri or Arkansas, Louisiana, South Texas, then it's a whole different ballgame. A lot of dry fields, some ponds and some river hunting, stuff like that. But, it started off pretty strong, and then it kind of, we had one front system come through, and it kind of pushed some ducks and didn't bring anything to replenish them. And then we got another little push of ducks right there before Christmas, and got another little system right after Christmas, right there before New Year's, and it pushed a whole lot of ducks out. Didn't really bring anything new with it. And, and heck, that's kind of how the whole season went. Just here and there as far as weather systems go, but you were always waiting and looking for that, that migration moment, I guess I should say, and heck, I mean, I talked to Jake, but we talked at least 3 times a week. What's going on in Nebraska up above me. It's like, man, heck, we had that front come through, and we had ducks and we lost them, and now they got fin. And, you got ducks. What's going on up there? And so it was a good season. We always were in the ducks, but we had to work a little harder than we would like to, burn a little more diesel than we like to. But what was unique, which I found, the one thing that really, really stuck out to me was we didn't get our really, really big push ducks till the very last week of January. Our last split opened on January 21st or 2nd, either way, that last week. And we had a big snow system come through, dumped a bunch of snow up on Jake and everybody in Nebraska north of us. And it dumped about a foot on us. And then it quit snowing about 30 miles south of us. And so that was pretty unique from the perspective of what we did have left. And we were almost empty for about a day or two. We had to struggle to find ducks for a day or two. And then it was like the heavens just opened up and they're here. I mean, it was pretty impressive. You didn't have to go far, didn't have to look hard. They were everywhere. Of course, we had like 5 days left of the season, which sounds typical for even us down in Louisiana, just getting right. And here it is shutting down. But yeah, I mean, that's kind of how the season went, and it was funny. I found myself giggling and chuckling every now and again, because it was, growing up in Louisiana, you're always waiting on that next front, and Jim and I talked about it plenty at length. Same thing in Arkansas. You just waiting on that next front, man. This next system, we're going to get them. We're going to get them. And that's kind of I just giggled because that's how I felt in Kansas all year. It's like, all right, this next system's going to bring them. This next system's going to do it. And it was, a little here, a little there. And then we just got the megawatt of them. Yep. So, a lot of people down south of us they're thinking the same thing. Like, well, man, hell, we don't get the ducks till late. And down south, I still think I don't think that's as accurate as possible, but for us in Kansas this year was dang sure accurate.
So do you think, coming from Louisiana, you would have thought you would have been in the birds, being in a mid-latitude state? You should have been in them the whole time, but apparently they weren't even there.
No, I mean, we had birds. Don't get me wrong. We had birds. We had plenty of birds. Like I said, we just had to work way harder than I wanted to work for them. I mean, you get to where you're burning a tank of diesel a day, per guide, looking for birds, trying to stay on birds, and it eats into your bottom line pretty quick there. So I'd like to get to where we're burning like a half a tank a day. Would be nice. but yeah, I mean,
especially at these gas prices.
Ooh, man, either the ducks need to show up a lot closer to the lodge, or gas needs to go down this next season.
Well, Jake and
Grant,
go ahead.
I want to touch on something you said there, Grant. You were saying you had plenty of ducks. They just didn't, act right or cooperate. That sounds a lot like what we talk about in Arkansas. So are you seeing a lot of what we would call, nocturnal ducks, just stale, lack of movement? Is that what you were seeing?
No, it was what happened was we get a push, and we got ducks start acting right, and ducks start feeding right, and they're coming off the water, and they're hitting the field and during legal hours, in the morning, or same thing in the afternoon. And then you'd catch a little warm spell. And I mean, heck, we had days in January that were in the 70s, for a high, and highs the 70s in Kansas in December and January. Y'all know, I mean, heck, you've hunted the Midwest at all. That doesn't do anything any good. I try to explain to my guys, man, look, it's going to be tough. If y'all want field ducks today, it's going to be tough. We can go and give it a whirl, and we'd shoot some, but inevitably you'd be setting up, and it's 15, 20 minutes before shooting time, and you're just getting swarmed, and they're bombing the field. And then 5 minutes after shooting time, they're back on water. They ain't coming back. So same thing in the afternoons, you'd catch a warm day and guys wanted, field ducks. All right, well, we'll do what we can for field ducks. And same thing, you'd be 5 minutes after shooting time picking up, and they just start bombing in. But, you know, and you get some precipitation or you get some cold weather and they'd act right. It was like it should be. But I just think the weather as a whole for us was killing us most of the years. You know.
Jake, or did you see a lot of the same things in Nebraska when y'all compared notes, or could one place feed off the other? Was there an obvious pattern, or was you guys kind of in a whole different world up there?
I mean, I think relatively speaking, we were in a different world. You know, we have the North Platte River, we have the South Platte River, and what people also don't realize is how important the Arkansas River is. It comes out of Colorado, runs through a little corner of Kansas, then Oklahoma, and then ultimately down into Arkansas. And a lot of that water ends up in a place like Byameda there in Stuttgart. And so, you know, our migration patterns are different. We have a big push that comes in around Thanksgiving, or actually in early November, around the 7th, 8th, or 9th of November. We get a big push of mallards that stick around for about a week or two, and then they're out of there and they just completely vanish like what happened. And then sometime around the 1st of December, between the 1st and 5th of December, that's when we start getting our wintering migration and population of birds in. And then, you know, as you start looking past Christmas into the first week of January, the reverse migration starts occurring back up from the upper Arkansas River and the South Platte River. So we start getting birds back in that first week of January. But something that Cason was talking about earlier, I'd like to address, and Jimbo and I talked about this a lot this year, was the nocturnal pattern that we had seen over the past 2 years. And the common denominator that we noticed was it started in that big big full moon that we have in early December, and something happens there, and it flips the clock, the biological clock in these ducks. And so we thought our ducks vanished. I mean, we really did, because there were times where, like Grant said, we struggled in terms of having to work a lot harder than we normally do to find, you know, birds that are vulnerable to calls or decoys or whatever it is that we could kill. And what happened was we started flying drones over these warm water sloughs that are on the refuge system that we're adjacent to, and there were literally tens of thousands of mallards sitting on these warm water sloughs, and we're going, this is really, really weird, because had you never been there before, had you not seen what we were seeing on the drone, you would have thought we didn't have a single duck in our area within 100 miles of us. They were there. So we started watching these ducks at night, listening for them at night. And right at dark, they were coming off the refuge, going out into a completely different flight pattern, which was southeast of us, which is pretty non-typical. Typically, they go west of us to feed. They were going southeast, and they were coming back into the sloughs before daylight. So there was no doubt we had a 100% nocturnal pattern going on for about 3 weeks. And we ended up, you know, we've got, I don't even know how many blinds we have, 20 or 30 blinds in different locations in an 18-mile or a 28-mile stretch. And we had to rely on 3 different locations to kill all of our ducks. So the concern that we had as an outfitting service in the business was, are we going to burn these holes out? Are we hunting them too much? We had no choice, because these were the only places the options that we had to hunt. And lo and behold, they turned into traffic spots. And we learned I think the blessing that we learned over the past 2 seasons was, you know, like the old saying goes, when the resources are lean, that's when you find out a lot about yourself and what you understand, how you adjust to the situation. And we learned a lot over the past 2 seasons. So if things get back to normal this year, which, to be honest with you, not to be a pessimist, but I don't see it happening. I feel like we're going to continue in this pattern that we have. You know, what we did learn, we're going to have to utilize, and that's going to become a standard operation for us from here on out until something changes about what's going on. So, we killed a lot of ducks. There were people that thought we had the mallard market cornered there really in January when no one else was killing ducks. There was a big question mark up in the air about the rest of the country. And, it looked on, and I'm going to be the first one to say this, and it's, not necessarily the best promotional value for us as a business, but we're talking honest, resource management and biology and Flyway analysis here. We struggled harder than we wanted to. And, our social media looked like, we were right on track. We were stacking them up. People were struggling and we were doing well. And while we did kill our share of ducks, we had issues too. So we are in this with you guys, the people around us, the outfitters around us. We keep tabs. We're good friends with the guys up at Wild Nebraska that exist up on the Wyoming-Nebraska border, for about 60 miles west of us on the North Platte River. They had the same problem. They had the worst season they've ever had, and they're a big operation as well. So, this is something that needs to be talked about. We got to get this figured out. It's very disheartening, like you said early on in this discussion, Doug, that we're going to miss these nesting data up in Canada because of COVID, which I think, all things being equal, I think it's ridiculous that they're not able to do that, but they're not. And we're going to have a huge gap in our scientific data come next year or the year after, whenever they open this thing back up. And that's going to cause to me, it's just like, without having that information, it's like when you have a deer population or a turkey population and you start missing age classes and gaps, you create a problem for the next 5, 6, 7, 8 years or longer down the road. And if we don't speak loudly and get this figured out, then I feel like we're going to face some consequences that we don't want to face.
So this is just a general question for anybody to answer. I mean, here we go, another podcast, another group of hunters, totally different territory, and yet everybody's saying something's going on. I mean, obviously through the State of Waterfowl series, we've discussed a lot of things. And when you talked about the ducks going nocturnal, Jake, the first thing comes to my mind is pressure. They definitely are responding to pressure, but you guys don't come from a heavily populated area for hunting, and you guys definitely utilize your property as best you can. So in your opinion, it sounds like pressure wasn't an issue for you. So what do y'all think's making these birds go nocturnal if pressure's not the issue?
I think there was a biological factor. I don't know what it is. I'm not about to even guess on what it is because I don't know. I did talk to a waterfowl biologist up in Ontario while this was going on. He had chimed in on a couple posts that I made on Instagram, and we got to talking privately through the direct messaging, and he felt like because of the pattern that's occurring all over the country, this can't be solely due to pressure. This has to be some other biological factor that's creating this. And his guess was that it's some sort of a food, something with their natural diet, a dietary issue. But, again, I mean, that was just theory and process of elimination on his part because he didn't have a true direct answer either. But I'd love to hear what you guys think.
Well, I mean, no, heck, somebody else wants to talk, but I was gonna comment on what Jake was saying earlier, and I guess when Cason asked me earlier about nocturnal ducks, I didn't really answer the question, and I realized that when Jake started talking. But yeah, no, I mean, if you want to go back and look at duck behavior that I witnessed in Kansas, like I said, if it was a little warm, sunny, clear, yeah, man, I would absolutely say that the ducks are eating way heavier at night than they are in the daytime. Now, the only times that they were gangbusters in the field was precipitation. You know, we had a few days that was just super cold with some snow left on the ground, and they still acted a little right, but we still had birds coming early before shooting time. You know, I mean, and it wasn't, if the sun was going to come out, it wasn't going to last near as long. But yeah, so I mean, I guess in that respect, you could definitely say that sure, those birds are using, you know, the darker periods of the day to do their thing rather than during legal shooting time. You know, but I will agree with everything else that Jake said 100%. I mean, you see it in one form or fashion, you know, riding around. The only, you know, whether you could draw a parallel between this or not, and I just thought about this, was, you know, Jake's got 28 miles of warm water sloughs on the Platte there. You know, we've got some significant rivers. I say significant for central Kansas. They're significant. You know, I got a couple miles on the Saline, up, you know, about an hour north of us, and I got several miles on the Smoky River, 30 minutes north of us. Got several properties on the Arkansas, 30 minutes south of us, and we got several properties on the Nenaska River, an hour south of us. You know, and all four of those rivers are very different. You know, the Arkansas is pretty narrow in most of the places where we are. It's got tree cover on it. The Smoky is a little wider than Arkansas. It's got bigger sandbars, but it's also got trees on it. The Saline is really narrow, doesn't have that many trees on it, but they use the hell out of it. The Nenaska is real wide, does have trees, but huge sandbars. These thing, you know, I think as much as the ducks do. And the one parallel that I would draw, or if you could draw a parallel to it, you know, Jake's got these warm water sloughs, and warm water sloughs in the refuge, as he mentioned, that the ducks were using at night. The only thing different that I can see is, you know, when our temperatures get down, it all freezes. I mean, the rivers will still be open to a point, but they're getting super chunky, you know, and when they get super chunky like that, I found that the ducks will use it, but they're not using it near as hard as if it wasn't chunky, if everything was still froze, but the rivers were open and just not, you know, super chunky. So yeah, I mean, that might be one of the only parallels as far as forcing birds or allowing birds to go nocturnal, where they can have access to open water, and they know they have access to open water, and they're comfortable with leaving in the middle of the night, you know, leaving at night to go feed, because they know they can always come back to water. Whereas our birds, they leave too late in the day. They leave, you know, when it's super cold, they leave too late in the day and give too much darkness on that water, and it's going to get hard.
I think that's super. Jimbo, I want you to chime in on this too, because you and I talked very profoundly about this, and I feel like that super moon has something to do with their photo period, in their biological photo period, because that's when it started. Okay, or at least for us, in 2 years in a row, that's when it started, and then it's almost like their biological clock flipped, and it took them 3 weeks to get back into it, because, you know, it started, I forget when it was, like December the 10th or something like that. And it ran through the end of the month. And then the first week in January, it's like, you know, the duck gods open the gates again. And I will add this, which was a completely different phenomenon to what we normally see at Prairie Rock. And that is, the fields that we know that they feed on, they don't rotate their crops like they do in a lot of parts of the country. It's just corn. It's corn, and it's corn, or alfalfa, but they don't rotate that out because they have to have, you know, 5 years of growth for alfalfa to really mature. So they leave them. And some of the cornfields that they were feeding in traditionally on at certain times of the year, or when certain pushes of the migration would arrive, it changed. Last year and this year, it was different. Remember, Jimbo, when we followed those ducks from Crane Grove all the way out to that upper creek and those pine hills on the west end of our property, that place had, I don't even know how many, you know, we could argue about how many ducks were on that cornfield. And that was a perennial feed in January for, I'm going to say, between 80 and 150,000 mallards every single year, year after year, year in and year out. This year, I didn't even see them on that field. I never saw one duck on that field all year. And when we got in late January or really mid-January, and we started, we were kicking their butts in mid-January to the end of the season. And the day that started, those ducks, I called you. You remember, Jimbo, they came out of the southeast, which I had never seen before. In 31 years of hunting the North Platte River, I'd never seen that happen. I'm not saying it's impossible, but in 31 years, when you've never seen it occur like that, there's a change. Something happened. And again, I don't know what it is. I'm just throwing mud against the wall, and I'm going to let you guys figure it out.
Well, I wish I could. I know that was a cool feed. And when we were out there, we were just come on the tail end of one of them big moons. And if you remember, when we were seeing those ducks, it was late afternoon, late evening when we were following them. And it made for some cool footage and a cool deal. And no telling how many ducks were there. But besides the moon, I think there's some other evolutionary pressures going on with these ducks based on hatches. We haven't had a big hatch in several years. Even though it's easy to say, well, it's not pressure oriented when you're in western Nebraska or central Kansas where there's not a duck hunter. It's not like Mac's parking lot day after Thanksgiving or nothing duck hunter wise. Yet that being said, even though we have less duck hunters today than we had in the mid 70s, the duck hunters we have are better educated, their skill set stronger, and they're willing to travel more. Man,
that ain't no lie.
There may not be as many of us, but we're better at it, and we're willing to get in the truck and go. So I think that's adding pressure in places like the Platte. Although you get to riding around out there in Jake's country, we were scouting the other year, and we rode up on a duck blind. We had drove 10 miles through a cattle pasture, and here's an old dilapidated duck blind. So them cowboys out there have been hunting ducks too for a long time. It's nothing new, but there's a lot of people that – we've taught them to be better callers. We got better decoys. They're better at hiding. They're better at studying. So we are adding more pressure to them. So in a sense, without a hatch, with an older population of birds, I think they're kind of realizing that if we go fly around at night, them rednecks ain't shooting at us. And I think that's some of what's going on. Coupled with, I agree with Jake, there's something about that supermoon the past 2 years. I know the deer guys really expand on the red moon theory, but them ducks flip-flopped. I'm with Jake. It created something, and in some parts of the country they came out of it, in other parts they didn't. But I think a lot of it will all go back to recruitment, and if we can ever get a really strong hatch again, I think that will help immensely, along with some real winters. When was the last time we had a real winter, where we had sure enough cold up there on the above the 49th, and of course the warm water sluice system in West Nebraska is pretty awesome, especially when they got food. But when that food gets all covered up for days on end, the warm water sloughs don't matter, and then they go to Jake and they wind up with us. But if you take last year's weather, Dr. Mike Brasher did a pretty good synopsis on this whole deal, and it kind of makes sense. If you look, we had that really good cold front in late October that early migration was big. We had a lot of ducks here, but then weather got mild, and we went for a long time, Doug, that temperature was the same in Lake Charles, Louisiana as it was somewhere in North Dakota, y'all remember that. The weather was the same, so there was nothing changing. And I think that drives ducks to, one, when the weather's nice, there's probably more folks out jacking around hunting Grandpa's farm pond. But they also realize they don't have to feed as much. There's not as much pressure on them to have to feed. They can live a long time with just a little bit. So I think that causes them to be still and conserve energy, because they don't need food as much.
During this whole duck season, when we were scratching them out, I talked to friends of mine up in Montana and upper Wyoming and even North Dakota, and they held birds longer than usual north of us, and even into, like, they never came down. Even when they had bad weather, they never came down because they had open water and food. So, there's so, this is science, and science is theory. It's a process of elimination. By the time we figure it out, it'll either be way worse or way better. And it'll be irrelevant at that point, right? Unless we go through this again when we're all old and crippled on our front porches, drinking whiskey.
There you go.
Well, I know talking about that, heck, I talked to Claudio Angaro several times. I'm probably, heck, during the season, I talk to him probably once a week, just getting a feel for what their birds are doing. And, do they bug out? Do they tuck tail and run south, or what they doing? And, I know they had birds, strong mallards into mid-December. I talked to them right there at Christmas time, and they still had real strong mallards in central Alberta. So, I mean, take that, but, and it's, I hear y'all talking about this supermoon. Heck, I remember talking with you, Jimbo, right there on December 16th, 17th-ish, and heck, we were actually we were covered up then. We were banging them hard from, hell, I don't know, maybe December 5th through till Christmas. Really, we shot them pretty dang good, pretty strong.
Y'all should have been getting a big push of new ducks in at that time. I know.
We were
5th or 6th is when we really get our wintering population density in at that point. So that must have been when y'all were getting your new birds in.
Yeah, we did. We got a real strong push then, and like I said, we shot them pretty strong. And then right there at Christmas time, they moved out, and we didn't get another really good push. We didn't get another good push in the last week of January. But
Jimbo mentioned weather, and a lot of hunters, when you say weather, they're like, oh, that's what you blame it on, but we still get cold, and they don't really believe in it. But I'm sitting here looking at a study right now. If I don't know if any of you guys are familiar with what they call the Christmas bird count, and it's a day when everybody goes out and counts all the birds that they can find, both amateur birders and scientists. And it looks like this study that I'm looking at, the National Audubon Society and Clemson University, compiled all of that data that's been collected on the bird counts since from 1969 to 2019. And basically, when they compiled all the numbers, the study showed that 16 species of ducks that winter in the southeastern United States have shifted northward over the past 50 years due to temperature changes attributed to climate warming. The study that was published in the Journal of Wildlife Management was based on this Christmas count. And one of the lead authors says, basically in a quote, "The weather has stopped becoming severe enough in the winter to prompt birds to fly south. They're staying further north, and they're telling us that something fundamental has changed in their environment." So, it's just, we always talk about trying to back stuff up scientifically. And I know you can argue weather patterns, but, things are trending warmer aspect. And here's a study right here that's showing more birds are trending northerly. So that kind of fits into what some of the things you guys are saying.
Well, I think that's one of the big parallels in what we've talked about so far. When you listen to Grant's comments, when the weather was flat, they weren't killing ducks in the fields. It was taking precip or cold weather for them to really start killing them hard. And Jimbo, it's no different for you and I. In Arkansas, we saw the same thing all year. So we've kind of already hammered that home, but it's true. When a duck doesn't have to eat, it's easy to go out and loaf at night. But when it's cold and he's having to refill those stores, that's when he's killable in the middle of the day or early in the morning because he's going places that he knows are dangerous. You couple that with an older age class that we're starting to see because we've had some low recruitment over the last few years. You've got a smarter duck that has learned how to survive. And until you force it to do something out of its norm, it's not going to. The moon thing is really interesting. I wanted to get to this. We had a radio marked mallard hen that returned back really close to us, about 2 miles away, just before season opened. She was living in a block of woods and would stay there every daylight hour. In the middle of the night, she would leave those woods, fly to our farm, and she was feeding in the middle of the night in a bean field a bean field that had been flooded since October. So there's no grain left at all. She was feeding on invertebrates early in the year. She was already nocturnal. We were still killing ducks then. You know, the nocturnal hadn't shown up as far as what we were seeing in the fields, but based on that duck, they were already doing it, just not to an amount that we could tell. And that was really interesting to me. But you can't rule out pressure either, because that bird's been shot at since September. So a lot of times you think about your opener, like, oh, these birds hadn't been pressured, but that's not really true. You got to think about the flyway as a whole. So I don't know. Ultimately, there's so many factors that come into it that we're just starting to see them all.
What if the answer truly is E, all of the above? I mean, I think that's probably what we're looking at, you know.
I think that's really
exactly
accurate. Right. Yeah, no doubt.
Yeah.
Spot on.
Jake, in your years in Nebraska, have you seen any changes in agriculture that were obvious? So
Zero. That didn't. That's why I stated that earlier. They don't change agriculture there. I mean, they irrigate out of the North Platte River. That's been, it has a cap on new irrigation systems, but the fields that have traditionally been irrigated with center pivots have been that way since they built the dam on Lake McConaughey in 1944, I believe it was. And so there's a moratorium on new ones, but you know, the cornfields that I saw 30 years ago are cornfields today or tomorrow. And so
now, as far go ahead, Jake. I really don't mean to cut you off.
No, that's okay. That has the agriculture practices haven't changed. So
yeah,
go ahead, Grant.
No. I was just going to say, talking with a lot of the farmers that we hunt on in Kansas. No, I mean their grain really hasn't changed field to field. You know, whether they're planting milo or corn or beans, wheat, what have you. But I have talked to a few of them that have changed practices over the years. Instead of chopping their fields in the fall, they chop them in the spring. So, I mean, I don't know if that could be, if this is part of that no-till ag that you want to hear people talk about or what have you. But, hell, I got a video. I got a video that I took St. Patrick's Day when I was up there. St. Patrick's Day, there was a field loaded with mallards, pintail, gray ducks, widgeon, green-winged teal. They were all dry feeding in a cornfield. And I actually got out because there was a farmer I know real well. We hunt on a lot. I got out and walked in that field, and there was still corn everywhere on the ground. I mean, from the combine. I mean, still corn everywhere on the ground. And I'm thinking to myself, it's freaking middle of March, and there's still corn on the ground. And these ducks are still using that corn. Now, granted, a lot of those ducks are probably reverse migrators, but yeah. I mean, they were still using that pretty hard. It was kind of crazy.
And see, the inverse is true for us down here, Grant. We see a lot more fall tillage, and that's the first thing that you do. When you get that seed, you put it back in the seed bed, get soil contact and moisture, it's going to germinate.
Yeah.
Right. So practices haven't changed, but overall efficiency of combines, our planting dates are earlier. I mean, Arkansas is a wasteland compared to what it used to be, habitat and food-wise.
If it's a dry fall, we're a biological desert. If everybody can get in the field around here.
Can I? Go ahead. No, go ahead, Jake. What you got?
I was going to say, as the season progresses, particularly from after the first week of January into when our reverse migration heads into the breeding grounds in the Prairie pothole region, they change their diet from agricultural, diet to a more natural, organic, protein-based diet, being, whether it's invertebrates or tadpoles. Our ducks feed on, and I just found this out this year, but our ducks, our warm water sloughs hold bullfrogs year round, even when it's 10 degrees outside. I've seen female bullfrogs swimming around under the ice in these warm water sloughs. And I started kicking some old tumbleweeds up in these warm water sloughs. And you can't believe the number of tadpoles in there. And I'm like, okay, that's why these damn ducks are in here, they're feeding on these freaking tadpoles. And so, they change their diet. And, what does that have to, how does that come into play in terms of late season hunting, and the food resources that you have available in your area where you're hunting, the organic diet?
Well, quite a bit, but
funny you go ahead, Jim. I was just going to comment on bullfrogs.
I'm fixing that.
Hey, me being from South Louisiana, I found a couple of flues in Kansas. I walking along during season. I'd be damn. There's some pretty salty bullfrogs running around. I was like, hell, I'm gonna come back and catch a few up here.
There you go. I was just going to say, I'm fixing to have to get out of here on you, but Jake, you're on to something there. There's definitely a physiological difference between what ducks need on the flyback than they do on the fly down. They definitely got to switch to more protein based for feathers and molting, especially the hens, for making eggs. And you'll see it here, even starting in January, especially ducks when we still got February. They're eating them bugs and shadow bean fields, and they're big on bugs and acorns at that time of year. But look here, guys, I'm gonna let y'all.
I was just going to say, we see mallards dry feeding in the cottonwoods in the timber, in late January and early February. Geese too.
There you go. Well, man, I hate to leave on y'all. Y'all can finish this conversation up without me. Be nice to one another. Enjoyed it, and look forward to catching y'all on the next one. Y'all have a good one.
Yep.
We'll see
you, Jimbo.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jim.
You bet.
I'm Cason. I'm trying to find this text message that Paul Link had sent me. That Paul Link and I, this dialogue we had. He called me back when that freeze. He called me back in that freeze and was like, "Hey man, you still in Kansas?" And I was like, "No, I migrated south. I wasn't staying up there. 30 below wind chills. I'm out." And so he was like, "Dang," he said, "I had a bird die just east of you." He's like, "I'm gonna send you the coordinates and see if you know anybody in that area that could go pick it up. Pick up the collar for me." I was like, "All right." Well, he sent me the coordinates, and happens to be a farmer that I know extremely well, and I hunt on them a lot. And I called him up, and he was like, "Yeah, man." He's like, "Shoot, we were fixing to go ride quads anyway." And so they went and looked around. It took them most of the day because there was a foot of snow on the ground, but they ended up finding it, and they found probably 25, 30 birds that were also dead of assumed exposure in this field. So, when I'm relaying all this message back to Paul, he was like, "Yeah, I was afraid of that." And I think it was a bird. It was either a bird that he had put a collar on in Lacassine or maybe there in Brinkley. I'm not real sure, but it was one of the two. I know.
Was it a transmitter or a collar?
But GPS.
Okay.
Yeah,
Both.
GPS.
I mean, it's a GPS collar,
transmitter collar.
Okay,
yeah.
Okay.
But yeah, and he and I kind of got. And I know, hell, I hate Jimbo left, but Doug. I know Doug and I and Jim. We've stayed up at the lodge lots of nights talking about this. But after December 22nd, a lot of people don't want to believe it and buy into it. But man, you're down south, we're not getting a lot of push. When I say down south, I'm talking about Louisiana. I mean, those birds, Louisiana, Arkansas, they're going to ride it out. Here's a greater white front that left South Louisiana, went up through Arkansas, over into Oklahoma, and then up into central Kansas, and was in central Kansas when that system came through. And it literally, they just hunkered down. They're like, hell, we're headed back north. We're on a mission. We're not going back to Louisiana. So they just hunkered down and try to ride it out. And unfortunately, there's a lot of them that didn't, but, seeing that telemetry data and what Paul had to expand upon with a lot of the other birds, collared birds, it kind of hit home. Yeah, hell, this is, we've been thinking this for a long time, and I think it's really accurate.
I think the data we're going to need is, I'm sorry, Cason, the data we need is going to be more radio telemetry GPS studies, because banded birds don't do us any good anymore other than our egos on social media. Radio collars and transmitters is where we're going to get our information. And until they do more of that, we're not going to really know the answer to this. But I do believe that if they radio more migratory birds,
absolutely,
then we're going to learn. We're going to have a whole lot better, and keeping up with them, not weekly or or even daily, hourly, keeping up with specific birds in different parts of the country in groups of birds on the hour, so that we understand what they're doing during the day and during the night.
Yep. Yeah, Paul's one of the best at that. That was one of the units that we had trapped, and it was interesting during that whole freeze. I think in the course of that freeze, Paul lost 9 units, and if you look at the number of birds that are actually wearing those units, and a lot of scientists and biologists are going to tell you that a bird that's marked with that is more susceptible to a freeze than one that's not. All right, but take that as it is. You extrapolate out from 9 radio marked birds that died, how many in the overall population did we lose? I mean, I know guys that went out and found north of 200 birds on their property that didn't make it, and they were trying to ride that freeze out. But it's a little bit of a loaded question, but we talk about photo period. What's happening from, let's say, Christmas on? What changes? The days are getting longer, right?
Yeah.
So, especially in the South, you always have these guys in the South like, man, the ducks are coming. They're coming. Need to get cold to push them down here. I don't think that many people realize that when those days start getting longer, birds have going north on their mind. And the further into that season we get, further in January, February we get, the more they know that it's a dietary issue. They think it's safer for them to ride that storm out than to expend all that energy moving south and try to find food. And they reach a point where they just starve to death because they can't leave. That was eye-opening this year. That freeze of that magnitude and all the radio marked birds, it was pretty eye-opening.
No, I mean, and I'm to expand upon that for a second, that what you said about, 9 collared birds dying, it was eye-opening when, my guy that went and I sent the coordinates to, that went and picked up that collared bird, when he was like, man, we found 25, 30 other birds that they were all in a wad, and they were all dead. Like, they just froze to the ground. Just in a cornfield covered in a foot of snow, just froze to the ground.
Do they hold moisture between their collar and their neck and it freezes? Is that what's causing it?
Yeah, if you get any freezing rain, it's like an absolute death sentence for a white front or a goose. I think a lot of biologists kind of dismiss it just because they're carrying extra weight. They've been handled. Anytime they encounter a human, they're not as wild as they were before. You'll find that a lot of people, and a lot of guys just kind of dismiss some of that information anyway. I know the sample size is a lot smaller. I get all those reasons, but it's a little disheartening sometimes to hear some of the response when you talk about the information. Like, well, yeah, but that's a transmitter bird. Like, right, but that's the only info we have, so.
Right. No, we desperately need the damn info. That's the problem,
Yeah.
Yep.
I mean, desperately need that info.
This is the future of our duck hunting right here, Walker.
There you go. Well, guys, it's hard to believe, but we've already been at it an hour. It doesn't take long to kill time when we start talking about ducks, especially with you guys. I know you've given me an interesting perspective. I don't get to go to Kansas or Nebraska near what I'd like to. I'm hoping to get to visit you guys, but it's been interesting to hear y'all's story, and I guess we'll kind of start wrapping this thing up. And kind of a recap, we've got a year of drought coming up above us in Canada right now. Production is not looking good. We got 2 years now of no data. I don't know, Grant, you got any closing comments or anything we left out that you'd like to tell our listeners out there?
Man, not really, other than just keep your head up. It'll come back around, hopefully. And I say that extremely optimistically for my brethren in the South, of course, where I'm from. Now that I'm not hunting there as much as I was, it's my kids still hunt here. I mean, heck, My family still hunts here. So, I mean, it's kind of one of those things. It's like, shoot, you just, hey, make the best of what we get, kind of make everything count. But at some point, people need to understand that, let's take social media out of the equation. It's not always about that hero picture, that full strap, or, that deck full of birds. And a lot of guys will, as they get older, heck, I know, Jake's got kids, you got young kids. I mean, I got, teenagers, and Cason's got young kids, and, heck, Doug's got grown kids, but at some point, it comes through all of us where, you'll realize, hey, I'm not doing this for me anymore. I'm doing this to pass on this heritage, this legacy, to continue it down the line. And really, for me, that's what it's about. I just soon see my kids shoot every damn thing that, I call in, whether it's deer, duck, turkey, goose, whatever. The days for me of pulling the trigger and making piles are, sure, they sell hunts and they keep lodges full, but that's not what it's about for me anymore. I mean, heck, yeah, it pays the bills, but that's not what it's about. I think we'd be a lot better off if people would really realize that, hey, there's a lot more to life than social media. So that's my opinion.
Yeah, Grant, you can't say that enough. You can't say it loud enough. We lose track of the culture of hunting, and it becomes about the kill. And I don't know, man, there's so much more about a duck hunt that's fun and amazing, hanging out with your buddies, than just taking a picture and putting it on social media. So that's a strong statement.
Absolutely.
Jake, any last closing words for you?
I think one of the things we haven't talked about in this discussion is the cyclical nature of natural resources. And sometimes that's the culprit, and sometimes it's not easy for us to accept, because that's not what we want to have happen, because it diminishes the desire and the need for us to fulfill those daily dreams that we have, or people that pay for, between Cason, Grant, and myself, and yourself as well, people that pay to come live out those dreams. That's not what we want to hear. And I'm not saying that is the culprit, but that is a factor, and that's a variable in all this. And I would agree with them that, social media has become, a place to boast and strut in front of, all your followers and whatnot. And at the end of the day, why don't we start trying to educate people and speaking the truth about what's going on? Because we live in a world of fake news, and we're as much a part of that as politics is. So, just beware, be boastful and be proud, but at the same time, be real, man.
Yeah, no doubt. You said earlier, what you talked about cyclical is very good statement. But at the same time, if we have a few bad years, if we're not careful, we can ruin ourselves for many years to come. And we just want to be careful that we're not experiencing that right now. And that's kind of the whole purpose of this State of Waterfowl, is just to bring attention. And you would think in year 2021, we think we know everything, and yet we're finding out in the waterfowl world with this new telemetry that we don't know half of what we thought we knew. So it's some really interesting times. And
I think half little. I don't think we know half of what we thought we knew.
I don't know about y'all, but I do not want to relive 1983.
Jake, I was going to say, man, you're on a right point about it being cyclical. Most all of us remember the days of shooting lead and the point system and 3 and 30 and all those things. So we've seen ups and downs. I don't think the sky is falling. I do think we need to pay attention and be very cautious about what we do, but it's not as bad as maybe maybe as social media makes it seem. It's also not as good either. But one thing I think, just in our conversation here and talking to you guys, just the lack of survey this year due to COVID, I don't think we do a good enough job as hunters making our voices heard to people that make the laws and make the decisions. I don't think we're represented well enough, and I think that falls back on every one of us. more money can be spent on habitat, more money can be spent on research, and it's not. It's getting pissed away somewhere else. So we've got to step up. We've got to voice our opinions and be heard.
That's a whole nother conversation. that is a long podcast right there, buddy.
I don't think we have enough time for that one tonight. Holy cow.
Or enough beer.
No.
Oh, man.
What is it they say? History does repeat itself, but we got to learn. We have to learn from history too.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well said. A lot of great comments, a lot of great stories tonight. Before we depart, Cason, I'd like to, if you don't mind, can you give us a little ag report on what's going on in Arkansas? I know here in Louisiana, especially at Gros Savon, we've been struggling to get our rice in the ground, and we just planted probably the latest rice crop that we've ever planted. And I know more than half our crop will probably not be second crop this year like we do in the past. So a lot of struggles continue for the South Louisiana farmer. Are you guys experiencing some things? I know I was up there the other day and it looked pretty wet for you guys.
Yeah, it's been pretty wet. I don't think we'll have any ratoon crop this year, which we usually don't anyway. We actually finished up our rice planting 10 to 14 days earlier than last year, but it's been wet ever since. We haven't started beans or anything like that. A few farmers around us have. So I think rice acreage probably got in the ground a little earlier than last year, which is a positive, but it's been incredibly wet since we finished that up. So it seems to be a pattern in the last 4 or 5 years, just wet spring, making hay while you can when the ground's dry, which is very intermittent.
So the big talk down here is bean prices are going up, and we're actually considering planting some beans, which is extremely rare for us. Do you guys see a transition into beans this year in your part of the country?
We rotate about half and half anyway. So it's not changing our acreage at all, but $14.50 beans sure look pretty good compared to 6 and 7 that we've sold before.
Do you think?
I think you'll see some acres, especially as the wet season draws out. I think you'll see some guys give up on late rice and get some of those $15 beans.
Do you see any difference in waterfowl utilization in beans versus rice?
Yeah, pretty strong. Oddly enough, you'll see a lot of roosts established in bean fields, which is kind of surprising. Historically, they don't provide a lot grain-wise. Soybean sours quickly. If they're cut early, they're all going to germinate. It's just bean fields don't do a whole lot. But I've had some really good, really productive bean fields as well. So I don't know if that's an invertebrate population that's coming on later in the year, maybe as a product of it being in beans. So I tell people that are leasing ground, don't give up on a bean field, but as far as habitats, statewide, I'd rather see it all in rice.
Yep. All right, last chance. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say what Cason said. I mean, heck, in Kansas, I'm seeing a lot of guys. We had marginal wheat up there that they got burnt pretty hard with the cold weather, and heck, I got farmers spraying it down, chopping it down, and putting beans on top of it. It was going to be a marginal wheat crop anyway, and they're all fired up about the price of beans. So there's going to be a lot more beans in the ground in the Midwest for sure.
All right, well, good deal. If nobody has anything else to add, let's wrap this thing up and thank all of y'all. Thank you, Jake, for coming in and giving us your observations in Nebraska. Grant, good luck with your new endeavors up in Kansas. And Cason, I know you guys got a lot going on with your farming operation right now, so appreciate y'all taking the time. And got to thank the guys at Express Boats for giving us the opportunity to put this on and have this discussion. And I know there's going to be plenty more to come. We've already talked about several ideas on new guests and new topics, and there's just a lot going on in the state of waterfowl. So you guys stay tuned, and we'll hopefully get one out here pretty soon. So thank you, everybody, for listening.